to Minnesota!
One more state!
Hi everyone. I really need to apologize for disappearing for several months. I wasn't expecting to learn what I learned at Mayo, and it really threw me a fast one. I hope by the end of this video you understand why I had to take so much time for myself, and based on what I learned, I really needed to set time aside to deal with this FND, with what they have theorized caused my FND, and I needed to also work on a few personal things in my own life. I will try my best to be as open and honest as I can during this video, but I won't go too far into the details because then it'll just turn into gossip, and that's not what my family needs right now. I am just going to tell you what you need to know to understand where my FND came from and what I need to do to help treat it. This is a really hard video to make. Let me begin with how my Mayo experience went. Mayo is a wonderful hospital, and if you ever get the opportunity to go and be seen by these wonderful doctors, I would encourage you to at least try. It is a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Mayo is very different from any other hospital that I've visited. The first noticeable difference is that the doctors don't wear lab coats. They all wear suits. So unless you see a name tag, you probably wouldn't know that they were doctors working at Mayo. The second noticeable difference is that Mayo is beautifully decorated. It almost looks like a museum. And if you didn't know any better, you might think it is a museum. If you ever go to Mayo, give yourself a day to just walk around and really enjoy the artwork that they've provided. And the third and probably the biggest difference is that the doctors work in teams. So if you have a test done at Mayo Clinic, your test result isn't handed to one doctor. It's handed to a team of doctors, and they prefer to do it that way so that, you know, one doctor can catch what one doctor probably missed. So I was seen by two doctors at Mayo. One was a psychiatrist and the other was a neurologist. I saw the psychiatrist first just because that's how their schedules worked out. I did a self-assessment in the waiting room before I was seen by the nurse, and then the nurse performed a more thorough assessment on my mental health. They asked very serious questions. Some were a little uncomfortable, like they asked me, do you ever feel like someone is watching you all the time? Or do you ever feel like someone is listening to you all the time? Or do you feel like you see things that aren't really there? They were a little uncomfortable because I didn't know how to answer that. I mean, sometimes I see something out of the corner of my eye, but I don't know if that constitutes as seeing something that's not there. But I answered them as honestly as I could. I was honest about my abusive past and the trauma that I experienced as a child. When the psychiatrist saw me later that day, she explained to me how Mayo defines functional neurological disorder and what they're trying to do to better research it and to better treat it. She did use the computer system analogy that FND is more of a software problem than a hardware problem. So if you think about it this way, hardware is like the brain, the kidneys, the lungs, the skin, and the software is like the neurological highways. Those are a lot harder to look at and to figure out where the problem is. So that's why FND is considered a software problem. So she did her best to explain why it's difficult to diagnose the symptoms because there isn't a prominent hardware problem that would explain the symptoms. And she also talked to me about PTSD. The PTSD was better diagnosed by a psychologist as complex PTSD. What Mayo theorized is that my complex PTSD is what created my FND. She explained how PTSD can physically change the brain, and that is what they suspect what happened. So the next day I went to the neurologist where they did a video monitoring EEG on me. Basically that means they did a regular EEG test, but they also videotaped the whole thing so they could see what I was doing during the test. I did have a spell during the EEG test, which they captured. When my husband and I met with the neurologist later that day to go over the results, he told me, my spell is non-epileptic. It's most likely an anxiety reaction, but he did say they found generalized atypical polyspike brain discharges. The neurologist explained to us that this is generally called brain discharges because it's not necessarily epilepsy. It looks like epilepsy, and sometimes it's the beginning stages of epilepsy. But the neurologist is hoping that I just grow out of these brain discharges, because even though I'm 24 years old, my brain is not officially finished growing. So he's praying that these just go away on their own, because there's not much they can do about the brain discharges. There's no medication I could take that would stop them. I was very lucky to be seen by the professionals at Mayo Clinic. So let me tell you what happened after Mayo. When I left Mayo, they told me the best form of treatment that I could give myself right now is to do cognitive behavioral therapy and to see a psychiatrist. I talked to my therapist, and he said that he can do cognitive behavioral therapy, that he is licensed in it. So I decided to go ahead and do that with my therapist. I was also advised to think very carefully about what I need to do about my family situation, because it is dramatically affecting my mental health and it's not helping my FND. So when I returned from Mayo, I really had to think about what I had to do about my family, about my dad. It was at that time I had to get a little selfish. I took the brave leap and confronted my dad. Prior to confronting him, I gathered a lot of personal notes that I was going to give to him, and I also created an ultimatum for him. The ultimatum was either he had to get therapy for the many reasons that I was to provide, or he essentially lost me as a daughter. It came to that point. I realized that that ultimatum was necessary. I can't speak for anyone else in the family, but for me, that was necessary. My dad chose therapy. He did find a therapist, and to this day, he is still seeing that therapist. But the relationship between my dad and I didn't improve. And to me, that just felt like he really didn't care. He was doing this more to save face with the family. And that became very, apparent when he spontaneously came to my house. In the morning, he texted me. He asked if he could come over and talk to me. He made the impression that he wanted to come over and apologize. So I told him yes, he could come over. My dad expressed how much he hates the situation that I put him in, and that he was praying every day for God to just kill him, that he daydreamed about shooting his head off because of how stressed and frustrated he is because of the situation that I put him in. He apologized very briefly to me, but he was very distracted at the same time. It was like he wanted to apologize and defend himself at the same time, and he didn't know how to do it. He kind of gave up on apologizing, and he went into a 2.5-hour rant about how terrible our family is. He tried very, very hard to make himself look like the victim. He tried very hard to make it look like he was the one who was really suffering in all of this. He still didn't accept the fact that the abuse that he put me through as a child ultimately created my FND. After everything that he said, he basically told me that he would much rather move on with his life than to deal with this situation with me and go back to when things were normal. After he left, I called my mom and told her that Dad is thinking about killing himself. I told her just a few of the despicable things that he chose to tell me, and that was enough for her. As of today, my parents are separated, and I no longer have any contact with my dad. I am still doing cognitive behavioral therapy. I am getting better. I maybe have 1 or 2 spells a week. I haven't had a non-epileptic seizure in months. So that's great. I was denied disability. I found out a few days ago, actually. We are planning to appeal it and to try again. I am thinking about doing a live video to just answer your questions in case you were wanting to know more information about a specific topic that I brought up in this video today. Let me know in the comments if that's something you would want me to do. If you do have any questions that you want me to answer in a live video. I did read all of your comments asking me how I'm doing, if I'm okay, you know, if there's any updates coming soon. Again, I apologize that it took several months for me to make this video, but I hope you understand why it took me a while to create this. Anyway, I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.